why is what I'm wondering here. Why has the gaming industry completely lost its mind the last few years? It's really the thing that I'm thinking about is why have we lost our mind? That was rhetorical. I appreciate it. It was rhetorical. I will have questions, but that one was rhetorical. Since 2022, the games industry has experienced an unprecedented labor contraction. Some facts. 45,000 jobs lost between 2022 and 2025. 28% of developers were laid off between 2024 and 2026, and 20 to 30 large, 60 to 80 mid, and 150 to 200 small studios closed. And we see stuff like this. These all came from the first couple months of 2024. These are all top gaming publications. So something really bad is going on. I think we can all agree with that. And at the same time, the game industry remains by far the leading entertainment media sector. Which we can see. I like looking at this. I like sharing it with my friends that work in film and TV, books and music, that we appreciate their contributions, and we are by far the largest. How do these two things, I actually agree. How can these two things coexist, though? Unprecedented success, $200 billion annual revenue, and yet we've seen this serious labor contraction. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to reconcile those two things. I want to look to the past to see if we can figure out how we got into this mess and then project some things into the future to see how we're going to get ourselves out, which we absolutely will. I'm Shaun McCabe. I am the Director of Automation Engineering at Epic Games, and I am a 2001 graduate of the Full Sail Game Design program. Oh, wait, I can read down here. I want to start using this technique. It's a quote that I absolutely love. Does anybody know who said this? I'll also give you a hint. There are only two people that are quoted most of the time. One of them is Mark Twain. This is the other one. Does anybody have any guesses? Who said the farther back you can look, the farther forward you are likely to see? It would be way better if... Winston Churchill. Literally every quote you find is Mark Twain or Winston Churchill. This is what I want to do. This is where I want to start, because what we want to do is we want to talk about where we are right now, the things that we're seeing. We want to understand the history. And so the first thing that I want to do is look to the past. And we're going to examine the history of gaming over about the last 40 years through a very specific lens. We're going to look at it through an economic lens. And what I want to do is trace through the various eras and share some facts and figures about the gaming business. So we'll start in the good old days. I was actually born in 1977. I barely remember this era because I was just a little kid. And this is what it was all about. This is really how it started, this whole console business that I've spent about 25 years working in. It's all traced back to this time. And this was an absolute marvel to people when it came out. Like this absolutely, these games are primitive beyond all recognition, but it really blew people's minds at the time. You can see that happy family. And I remember when I was researching this, it was incredibly hard for them to even know how to market a game. They didn't even really understand how to do it. And you see a lot of really funny stuff like, is it for adults? Is it for kids? Is it for families? Why is that guy so irritated about something? Like, what's his problem? I don't understand what it's trying to communicate. They didn't even know how to market this new product that came out. And that was what we'll call the Atari era, Atari 2600. Any guesses how much a game cost back then to make? Dev budget. It cost more than $100 to make a game back then. It isn't, but good question. So it's close. Somewhere between $20,000 and $100,000. How much did an Atari game cost? Let's see, $30 to $40. That was the opening price. That was the opening to this entire era. If you've studied the history of game design, you will know shortly after 1983, the market crash, which was largely due to the inflation of the quarter, which destroyed the arcade economic model. It's amazing. A very, very interesting thing you can look up separately. I could talk about it at length, and I'm not going to. I'll spare you, but look it up. Next era, 1985 to 1990. This is when I remember playing my first console game. And that was this. We remember the fabulous NES. Once again, we see very, very happy families wearing sweaters. That's how you know that they're a good, balanced family, is because people are wearing sweaters over a collared shirt. This was definitely an evolution from Atari. Atari, they didn't exactly know who they were branding it to. Was it adults? Was it kids? I think that Nintendo found the sweet spot that this was definitely family entertainment. A lot of the ads that you look at from back then are adults and children together. It's how they approached it. The NES, some of the most amazing games certainly came out for that. I remember, obviously, Mario Brothers, the original Zelda. So a lot of really cool stuff on Nintendo. What was the dev budget for a Nintendo game? 120. What'd you say? Let's see. Okay, 100 to 500. So you're all mostly right. So it looks like dev budgets went up about 5x in that period. It's a really good reason. The Atari was incredibly primitive in terms of graphics, and one of the biggest reasons why dev budgets went up is suddenly you had artists working on games. The stuff was so primitive before, it was almost entirely a programmer doing all of the art. But in this case on Nintendo, you had sprites, and you actually brought in some artists, and you even had musicians because the music was more sophisticated. Games did also go up a little bit. They went up to about $45 to $50 during that time. Next up, 1991 to 1995. This is where it gets really good. So this is where you actually saw a new player enter. We had the Super Nintendo, which are some of the best games ever made, but we also had this other one, the Sega Genesis. Sega Genesis was really interesting because it felt like an upstart. And I know some Sega fans will say there was a Master System before that. Here's the thing, it was insignificant. The Sega Genesis was very significant because they were trying to make something that was edgier and older. If you remember some of the ads back then, if anybody remembers, Genesis does, but what Nintendo don't, there's no way anybody remembers that here. I just realized. Why should I say that? Nobody was probably even born then. What's that? I have seen the ad. You have seen the ad, yeah. It was, and they came out kind of swinging, like, Nintendo's not the only player in town. It was a really important time. A lot of amazing games were made. Let's go back and ask, how much did it cost? About $300K to $1 million. It was a modest increase. We were going from 8-bit graphics to 16-bit, but you were still working with like 8-bit palettes. Things were higher resolution. You could have more animations, which was a little bit more art, but it wasn't that significant. How much did those games cost? No way, it's $60, is it? $50 to $60? That was good, and I wrote this, and I didn't know the answer. I forgot. Okay, next up, 1995 to 2000. These were good years. This is when I first went to college. And we got this, the Sony PlayStation. We had another entrant to this market. I think the ads are interesting too. This is the first time when you saw the power being advertised as part of it. More powerful than God. It's a pretty darn bold statement, isn't it? And also, when I also think the first time I played PlayStation 1, it absolutely blew my mind. I was playing Battle Arena Toshinden, and I think you could like dodge into the screen. That thing, it looks like a piece of garbage, but the power was evident. This was the first time that I could find that people are actually advertising the underlying power of the console. We also had in this time, this came out, Nintendo came out once again, and it was the first, I think you could really say it was the first 3D processor that ever went into a console hardware. The PlayStation 1 was more or less a ginormous hack. It was more of a centaur, somewhere between 2D blitting and actually rasterizing triangles. Never worked on it. I heard it was awful. Nintendo 64, I also heard was awful. But it was true 3D. And the really interesting thing is, remember historically, Nintendo was very squarely like, it had this niche, but you see them moving into the power game. Live the game, believe in the path of least limits. Really, once again, you saw them going head-to-head with PlayStation to be the most powerful console. And they advertised it as 64-bit, which it's hilarious why they called it 64-bit. So, how much did a game cost in this age? 1.5. Anybody? Okay, let's see. Close. That was good. So this is a pretty significant budget increase. It's almost 5x. Why did the budget go up? Exactly. 3D graphics, you needed more artists. You suddenly had more game designers that were in there doing things. You just had more people to actually make these games, and so the budgets went up. How much did they cost, those original PlayStation games? They cost $40 to $60. They were actually cheaper. Does anybody have any guess why they were cheaper? Yes. Gold Star. Yeah, CD-based. Cartridges are hella expensive per unit. CDs are incredibly cheap. And so what Sony did is they went out and they set lower. I think some of them might have been like $39.95. I can't remember. They were cheaper. The whole reason why they're cheaper is they could be. N64 tended to be more expensive. They had to be. If you remember those cartridges, which I have to stop asking you that because I know you don't, because I know you weren't born, they were hella expensive. They were noticeably expensive. It was a cool thing about PlayStation. The stuff was just cheaper. Next up, 2001, 2005. I graduated in Full Sail in 2001. This is my first console that I ever worked on. Does anybody remember these crazy ads? This is for the PlayStation 2. These are absolutely the strangest darn things that you ever see. But what we see here, remember those early ads we saw were all about families, and now they're definitely targeting something more sophisticated, something a little bit older. They're trying to brand the PlayStation 2 as this mature console. If you look at even the typeface that you look at is sleeker, it's more sophisticated. Some of this is because gamers were getting older. Some of this was really Sony doing what they do best. If you think about Sony's brand going, Discman, Walkman, they created these sleek, sophisticated, cool products, and they wanted the PlayStation 2 to be that. But then we had another upstart. We had these green guys that had this frickin' green colors everywhere. I went to a GDC party, and they served this horrible, horrible tasting drink that was that color. It was awful. It was free. That was cool. But this is the original. And also, can you believe that was in a magazine, Big Black and all that? I feel uncomfortable saying that. I just want you to know, I did not write this marketing copy. This is what they did. The controller was gigantic. Everything was big about Xbox. It was big, it was loud, it had a very distinct brand. What's up, man?
I can actually tell about that console because I've used it. It was very interesting, but something I noticed about it is it tended to tint the screen green too.
I mean, everything is green about it. I feel like you're green up here, just having all that green on there. But we had a new entrant to the market. So in this, we had the PlayStation 2, the Xbox, and the GameCube sequel console. What are the budgets? $5 million. Can I see 10 million? I don't know. Let's see. 5 to 10 million. That was about right. When I remember the first games I was working on, probably some of the PlayStation 2 Ratchet and Clank games were probably in the $5, maybe $12 million range. What was the price for those games? There we go. It's not. It's $50. They were all using a form of CD media. Xbox is a new entrant, so they made it cheaper. GameCube had moved to those proprietary mini discs, which were still cheaper to manufacture than cartridges. Next, 2005 to 2013, what I like to call the bro years of tribal tattoos and third person over the shoulder with big triceps, and everything was very, very masculine. And we saw these ads. We saw the Xbox 360 jump in the lead, and I remember this ad. That's with the actor Hugh Laurie, wonderful actor who's on a very popular show called House MD back then. The other very interesting thing that I want to point out in the marketing, Xbox was pivotal in bringing multiplayer to the console space. Xbox Live, they really, really pushed it with the original Xbox, and they doubled down on it with games like Halo 2, which was a multiplayer marvel. But you can also see in the ad, this everyone's here. So they did talk a lot about the power of the Xbox 360, but most of the stuff that you saw was about this sense of community, like this is the place that you wanted to go and play games with very, very masculine characters. This is what PlayStation was doing. This is the PlayStation 3. This is the famously strange marketing campaign that the famous firm Chiat/Day put together. This is the least strange thing that I could find. But it was very odd. It still went with sophistication. There was a lot of talk about the power of the PlayStation 3, the cell processor. I did a launch title, Resistance Fall of Man, for the PlayStation 3, so I got to work with a ton with that cell processor, and it was truly bonkers and powerful. Both of those things were true. So looking at this, PS3, Xbox 360 era, what did budgets look like then? $25 million. A lot of this is an increase in resolution. The PlayStation 2 is actually relatively low res. Most things were running in 480. Some things could run in 480 progressive. Most things were running in 480. It didn't have a lot of RAM for the frame buffer, so you couldn't really do a whole lot with those pixels. You still needed a lot of ARP, but the budgets didn't go up. Well, you got a lot more sophisticated GPUs in this era, which is why you see budgets practically double. There was a certain point where a company, which I will not name, set $25 million as the price for both their internal and external products that we were talking to. Like a big name publisher was looking at $25 million in that era. How much did games cost then? You are right now. This was, in fact, what is called the $60 era. Next up. 2013 to 2020. So Sony changed. Remember, in the PlayStation 3, it was this very avant-garde marketing campaign, and it was really all about the power of the cell processor, or whatever the heck that meant. They completely pivoted and focused a lot on games in that era. I think very successfully. I think there are a lot of wonderful games for the PlayStation 4. This is what, and I think it was Andy House that would say, PlayStation is the only place to play. You saw this is for players. It wanted to make it the destination for the best games. I think it did a pretty successful job. There was also these kinds of like see the future ad, but realistically, they weren't marketing the power of the console. They were really just talking about the best place to play the best games. Around the same time, the Xbox One came out, and their big branding position was gaming and everything else. And what they would talk about is, this is a battle for the living room. I remember when we talked to Microsoft at the time, they said, really is what we're after. Like, we don't care about, I think they didn't say we don't care about games, but they really wanted to make the Xbox One the premier all-in-one living room control device. It even said games will never be the same. Also very big and green. It's a thing. So games then, budgets tripled. That was the first time that you could reliably do 1080, like 1080 frames. Most of the stuff in the previous generation was 720, so you got higher res. Again, GPUs got more complicated, which means prettier pixels, which means you need more assets to take advantage of it. You need more people. So budgets tripled. How much did games cost then? Boom. Look at that. 15 frickin' years. No change to the price. I remember being in a meeting with someone, with a publisher, during that time, might have been 2017, and they would talk about the $60 problem. It was something that people were talking about a lot, the $60 problem. That they couldn't see a way to actually raise prices because it's not what consumers wanted, but at the same time, they knew that there was a problem. You see that right there. Budgets are tripling, and the price is exactly the same. That is an issue. Then we go into the modern era. PlayStation 5 is pretty simple. I think the PlayStation 5 is the best console I've ever seen and ever developed. I think it's fantastic. You saw these future of gaming ads. They're still doubling down on games. There's some of the sophistication, I think, that was brought back that there was maybe less of that in the PlayStation 4 era. Wonderful platform. We saw the Xbox do this, where they almost adopted a PC kind of model where you could choose different editions and different versions. This is also a fantastic piece of hardware. Xbox Series X is a freaking beast. But you can actually also see that the Xbox, this version, was almost closer to the 360. It is a little bit more sophisticated. They went with the white. Very minimalist design. I think both of these are pretty solid consoles. I bias toward the PlayStation 5 solely because I developed for it. And it's awesome. I mean, I have a position of this which will become pertinent later just as a player. So at this point, games doubled. They went to about 150 million-ish. 150 million. What happened to the price there? Oh, we went to $69.99. People lost their frickin' minds. $10 increase. What does that plus stand for? What's that? Why? What are they doing? What do they do? Yes, deluxe editions. Yes. Deluxe editions, microtransactions, add-ons. It's the only way that they had to make it work. Because clearly the games needed to cost a lot more for the economic model. And we kind of found a way by offering consumers, similar to what Microsoft did with the latest Xbox. They have different versions. We offer the same kind of thing. We offer different versions of the games. The big fans can get the commemorative box, or I remember this one God of War edition that had like this ornate chest that immediately went into my basement, never to be seen again. But it worked pretty well. These things are all good. You also got some microtransactions coming in there. So let's take a look at this. There's something I want to add to it. So we have looked at budget and price. The one thing that we're not looking at is break even. What break even is the number of units you have to sell to pay off your dev budget. And so what we can do here is I'll add my break even slide. I'm also going to normalize these numbers. If you look at these, these ranges aren't great for doing math and stuff. So I'm just going to average out these two columns, average out the numbers, and we can look at break even. Oops. Sorry, there is another problem that somebody pointed out earlier, which is really good, is that we're not counting inflation here. So we really can't do a good analysis, because the truth is these budgets are a lot higher. Games have never been as cheap in history as they are right now. The original Atari in $2026, because inflation's a thing, would have cost $130. If a major game developer or publisher came out and said that they were going to charge $130, people would absolutely lose their mind. People would probably get killed over it. It is very interesting because people talk a lot about the price of games. I've read a lot about it recently. People are losing their minds. Here's the reality. They are cheaper on an inflation-adjusted basis than they've ever been in history. What do we see with the budgets at the same time? The budgets just keep increasing. The prices go lower. And that's reflected in the break-even. If you think back, all the way in the early days, you had, 1,500 units. That sounds about right. That's a pretty nice break-even. You get in the modern era, what is that? 2.2 million is about a break-even. But there is actually another problem here in that that's not the money that you get, that a publisher gets. What you actually get is the wholesale price. The wholesale price has a lot taken off the top from retail outlets. And so realistically, the price that you're getting as a publisher or as a developer when you're doing these deals has about 65%, so it has about 40%, or 40% taken off the top, sorry. So that's actually what you're getting. If you're shipping a modern era like PS5, Xbox Series X game, you're getting somewhere around $45 a unit. And what that does to the break-evens is this, which starts to get really scary here. You see at that bottom corner, just to break even, to not lose money, you have to sell 4 million units, which is not easy. I think that I've worked on 3 or 4 games that sold 4 million units, and most of them had the word Marvels in the front, which certainly helps a lot. That is a hard bar to hit for a modern budget game. But there is something else that I want to look at. When we look at that 4 million figure, and that is the size of the market, because that matters. A lot of the times people are willing to go with lower prices as the market expands. In fact, that's how you expand a market sometimes, is by going down prices. And so with this sheet, the thing that I want to add to it are the market size. So back in the early days, it actually peaked at $70 billion in inflation-adjusted dollars. It's a lot more than we thought, right? It's a very surprising number. It's big. And then it dropped, and it took about, 30 years to get back? It actually took 30 years to get back. Does anybody know why that went from 70 to 22? I mentioned it earlier. It was the arcade crash that I mentioned. Most of that $70 billion was the arcade business. The arcade business was incredible until, because of inflation, a quarter wasn't the right amount, and then they had to go to 50 cents, and then people lost their minds, which people do. That's what consumers do. When we mess with prices, they didn't have a good solution for it because they didn't have a 31-cent coin. Had they, the economic model would have stayed viable, but unfortunately, because things were coin operators, a problem. Yes?
Is this primarily for the American market, or did this include the Japanese?
This is global market stuff.
Yeah, because didn't the Japanese economy crash sometime in the 80s, 90s?
Probably in the 90s. In the 90s it did. Then next, we saw a gigantic increase in the market. From 2013 to 2020, we went from 80 billion to 200 billion. Why did the market increase so much? Why? Yes? No. Social media is responsible for all the world's problems. None of their solutions. Yes?
Everyone was stuck inside because of the pandemic.
No. It says 2020. I'll give you a hint. Is that a good hint? Mobile. Half of that $200 billion is the mobile market. And most of that has come to be in the last 15, 16 years, starting in 2010. So the mobile market was responsible for a massive, massive surge in expansion, especially globally. When you go internationally, there are far fewer consoles, but everybody has a mobile phone. So mobile games are insanely popular in countries like India, Brazil. Big part of the market expansion. Oh. So what I want to do here, since mobile and arcades and stuff are in here, what I want to do is I want to redo the numbers so it only counts console and PC, because I just want to illustrate a very specific problem. So it's just console and PC. This is actually what it looks like. The market started about 12 billion. It's about 100 billion today. It's about a 10x increase. And what can we glean from looking at all of this? Number one, wholesale prices have decreased about 45% from Atari. So games are about half the price that they were 50 frickin' years ago. There are two things that are wild about saying that. One is that the gaming business has been around for 50 years. And the second thing is that I've been around for 50 years. Both of those things surprise me. Second, market growth has increased 850%. We have a much bigger market than we used to have. Gaming is huge. Gaming is global. Gaming is international. Also, budgets have increased 95,000%. That sounds like a silly number, 95,000%. And something has to change. You can see where this is trending. Selling 4 million units of a game is not easy. It's incredibly difficult. Most people don't even get anywhere close to that. And there are a lot of reasons espoused for why things that are going on, and people are talking about AI, and they're talking about, what's other things people are talking about that publishers agree. I don't think that anything is necessarily true. I think everybody's trying to stay in business. I do think that AI is a potential disruptive factor, one of many that we've experienced over the course of this business. I think the biggest thing is just the economics don't work out too darn well these days. I think that is the biggest takeaway that I want you to have. We have looked across this entire history, and you can just see that trend. It's obvious, and it's pretty grim. What's going to happen with the next generation of consoles that are even more powerful, that have even higher resolution screens, that require even more high resolution assets, require more people, yada, yada, yada. Those break-evens are at a point where you're losing millions and millions and millions of dollars is a huge risk and can completely cripple the company. And so it is a very high-risk reward business at this point. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. We're not going to have to look at any more math. That's not really math, they're spreadsheets. But the numbers are interesting, right? There's a lot of surprising stuff that I learned in here. So something definitely has to change. We've looked at the past. We understand how we got to this point. What can we do about it? That's the big thing that I want to talk about next. And so what I want to look at is the future. Some of it's going to start now. What I have done is I've identified a handful of things that I think characterize the games of the future. It's the thing that I think about a lot. What kind of games are people going to be playing in the future? And what does it mean for us as developers? You aspiring developers, me as a current developer, what does it mean for us and where do we fit into it? So the first thing that I will say is that the future is multi-platform. This one's pretty interesting because once, there's the ad. That was the ad. Genesis does what Nintendo don't. Your choice of platform was a very deliberate decision, and people separated into different camps. There were Xbox people, there were PlayStation people, there were Nintendo diehards, there were Genesis fans. There was probably about 7 or 8 people that really loved the Dreamcast. There were a few good games for Dreamcast, but it was kind of doomed from the gate. It's very, very, very different now. I also like this one too. Sega owners dream on, or even Nintendo got kind of nasty in response to Genesis, which is pretty funny to see. Because Nintendo doesn't do that. It's not Nintendo's play, but they got drawn into it. It's really different. Back when I was younger, people generally chose hardware. It's very rare that people owned 2 consoles. I didn't get an NES until like 1989 when it got cheap enough. Every once in a while, there was one of those like rich kids that had like a couple of consoles. I was insanely jealous of them, but most of the time, you didn't see that kind of thing. So you choose a piece of hardware. These days, it's a lot more about choosing a game. People have a lot more taste. They are, Call of Duty players. They associate themselves with a certain game or game franchise. They are Madden players, and that is the identity they choose. It is decoupled from the hardware. The second thing, back then, switching hardware meant like a full reset. I don't know if anybody remembers going from like, there was one time I won, what happened is I won an Xbox One when I worked at Insomniac, like in a raffle. And I didn't have a PS4. And so I was an Xbox player for years and years and years until I ended up getting a PS4, which is really funny because I am a PlayStation fan. Like I've been a fan of the PlayStation since the PlayStation 1. I'm a fan of the games. I'm a fan of Sony First Party. Was part of Sony First Party and worked on those games. But I had an Xbox because it was free. That meant a lot. Like these prices do matter. And free meant a lot to me despite my incredible loyalty to the brand. And it was wild. Like I had my IG Shaun PlayStation Network ID and everything. I got to sign up for one of the first PlayStation Network IDs when it came out because I was a developer. We were doing a launch title. I've had that thing forever, and I just switched. I had to go to a gamer tag like on Xbox. It was a big deal. It was a pain in the ass. It was kind of like starting over. These days, I think, and in the future, the expectation is that you can play anywhere and that cross-play is ubiquitous. I think that the choice of device doesn't matter to people. I think that there are many games, whether it's Call of Duty or other experiences, that you can play across a whole range of devices. I think that that's the expectation. I am old enough to remember when people used to watch TV. That is not a thing that people do anymore. Generally, people watch Netflix, or they watch HBO, or they watch another streaming service, or maybe they just watch a show. They don't associate the act of doing that with watching TV anymore, because it's just different. The hardware is unimportant. Our expectation is that we can consume this media on the device of our choice, when we want, how we want. And the crossplay is becoming more ubiquitous. You know, it used to be all these things were walled gardens. Xbox players only played against Xbox players, and that's largely been expanded in different ecosystems. People want to be able to reach beyond that. This is the expectation of players. By the way, I forgot to mention this. Players are the boss. You all will go and you will work as game developers in the next couple of years, and you will have a boss, and that boss may have a boss, and you can ladder that up to somebody that has a very important title. But realistically, we all work for the players. The players make all the decisions, and that's why I want to view this through what players want in the future. And then the last thing, hardware really was an identity thing. I can't say enough, and it was a very, very strange time, but I remember, especially it was the Genesis fans, they were so rabid about it. And I think that when that happened, I was probably like, 13 or 14 years old, so I was a budding teenager, which is like the worst years of any person's life. And people were just terrible about it, and especially because Genesis had this bad boy image. These days, it's a lot more tied to ecosystem. It's a lot more tied to ecosystem. It's tied to franchise. It's tied to all these things that have nothing to do with hardware. And I really do believe, despite the fact that I spent a lot of my career developing for PlayStation platforms, that the real future that we're looking at, a lot of which is today, that future is multi-platform. I think of this one, too, as a pretty solid example where a lot of my friends are not gamers because they're losers, but they don't play games. But some of them say, I don't play games, but I play Call of Duty. And I'll ask them, where do you play Call of Duty? Oh, I play on PC. Oh, I play on Steam. I play on Xbox and stuff. The really interesting thing is it's Call of Duty that they say that they do. That is the act. They're not gamers. And they're not Xbox players, and they're not playing Xbox, they're not playing PlayStation, they're playing Call of Duty because that's what they associate with. That's some serious brand decoupling. Call of Duty is the identity that they have, not the platform. Also, the future is social. Who brought up social media? I got a dig in there. I like that. I like giving social media a hard time. So looking at social, back in the day, we selected games by choosing what looked fun. This is a game, I remember seeing it in the computer store, and this is the front of the box. That's a pretty sweet looking image. I was probably 9 years old when I saw that. Look at the promise of adventure. The promise of adventure is on the frickin' box, and it's amazing. And the really wild thing about it is for the Apple II is this is what the game looked like. There is a reason why box art was a thing back in the day, because there's no way that they could put that in the box. But realistically, you picked games by looking at what was going to be fun on the box. You couldn't look it up. You couldn't generally read reviews. There weren't really reviews for anything like that. A lot of it was just about that instantaneous appeal. And that held for a really long time, that people would pick something that looked fun. Now, players choose what their friends are playing. What percentage? 70% of players base their decision on what their friends are playing. And it's unbelievable how big of a shift that is. Why do they want to play what their friends are playing? And it really comes down to this social element. There used to be a time when social features were built into games. Again, I credit Xbox Live with doing a lot of this, building like cool social features in there. PlayStation eventually followed, but I think that Xbox agreed to be the pioneers in this space. So there are these different social features that you can get that were kind of built into different games. What I've seen, and it really all started with this, gamer tags that they did for the original Xbox. Now, what's really wild is it's inverted. It's like games are built into persistent social spaces. It is completely inverted. Social features are not built into games. It is actually the other way around now. If you see things recently, like this is one of the recent friends list updates from Steam. Games are social destinations for people. They are places to go and hang out and do something together. That is a massive shift from where things have been in the past. Sessions used to be about completing content. That's really what games come down to. You're trying to get by some stuff. You're going to beat a mini-boss, and you're going to beat some other red shirts, and then you're going to beat a boss. Or maybe you'll die and get pissed off and have to restart. That's been going on for a really long time. But a lot of it was about let's see what the next level looks like. This looks cool. Games today and games in the future are a lot more about spending time together. They're really, really about that. It is a very strange thing to observe my 12-year-old son's behavior, where he will spend time playing these very, very silly games that he plays. He's playing on the PS5. And most of the time he's just joking with his friends and mumbling to them and using brain rot terminology that I don't even really understand. It's kind of unintelligible to me. But so much of it is about social. He thinks of it as hanging out. It's fascinating. That's a really big change, games as a social destination. And then the other thing, we went back there. A lot of the times games used to compete on mechanics and graphics. That's what was really important. You wanted to get the game with the best graphics. You wanted to get the better graphics cards. You wanted to play these certain games because they had better game mechanics, because they were more interesting, more innovative. Today, it's a lot more about network effects and communities. It's been a really profound change over the last several years. And so fundamentally, I do believe the future is social. Games used to be destinations just for gameplay, destinations for distraction. Now they are destinations for meeting and hanging out with people, which is really different. It's a different element. Lastly, looking at the future is relevant. Let me unpack this for you. So when I was in 6th grade, there was a fellow by the name of Scott Markovich, and Scott Markovich was about 50 times cooler than me. He wore British Knights high tops, which I could not afford. I was very jealous. I think he had a pretty cool semi-mullet haircut with feathered hair, something like that. But the thing that I really remember about Scott Markovich is when he brought this box in for Super Mario 2, and my God, I was jealous. This is not a particularly good game in retrospect. I think it was skinning Mario on top of a completely different game. I think the story goes, it was. I was just really jealous that he was the person that came out and got this really cool thing, because Super Mario Bros. 2 was huge at the time. And really what we're talking about is games driving the conversation. Historically, games have adopted a hitmaker model, where the best example that I can think of is there was a certain time after Game of Thrones came out where men and women were dressing up as the Khaleesi. I tried to find some pictures of it, and they were all so embarrassing I'm not going to show you. They did that because Game of Thrones was the biggest thing that was going on. And so that is the nature of the hit-making business, is you are going to put something out there that is so important that it's what everybody's talking about. Water cooler moments. It's what people talk about. You need water cooler moments in your game. I've never stood around a water cooler and talked about anything. I feel like that analogy ended in the 60s, and yet people still used to talk about water cooler moments. It's because you want the game to drive the conversation. It's the only way. You can't expect a game to be relevant because they take too long to make. You don't know what the world's going to be like 2 or 3, 4 years from now. That's what I mean about relevance. Now, games can react to culture in real time. That is a massive change. The example I like the most is this. So this game can only exist today. And I know that people kind of groan about it, but I think it is absolutely amazing, because what you had brain rot. and then you had Italian brain rot, and then somebody was like, we should make a game about stealing brain rot. I'm not even sure if this is a game by a conventional definition, but it's incredibly popular, and it drew because it tapped directly into something that was relevant in the moment. That is not something you can do in AAA games generally. You know, like, these games take a long time to make. Spider-Man takes an awfully long time to make, and so we make some broad guesses about it, but you realistically don't know several years from... Do you understand the point that I'm trying to make? You can't predict what's going to be socially relevant or what's going to be cool sometime in the future. And so what you're trying to do is you're trying to define what cool is, which is very hard to do. Things like Steal a Brain Rot are kind of ingenious because they can actually tap into something that is relevant. I'm not going to say it's cool because it's not. It's completely absurdist, but if you think of this kind of like mimetic environment that we live in that's constantly changing, the pace of which things change is absolutely bonkers. The concept of virality is bonkers. Who can tap into that? The way that we used to make games just can't do that. Games like, oh boy, what do I have to do? Okay. Only Steal a Brain Rot can do something like that. Secondarily, there was a time when developers shipped a finished product, and I think that this is even true to a certain extent for games that had multiplayer features, because generally what you do, I was usually on the single-player side, you would finish up the single-player game, and then you go and take a vacation, try to relax, and the multiplayer team, smaller multiplayer team will maintain that. Sometimes you're working on that, but generally speaking, there was this kind of point where you were done, and then I would go to Target or something and see a freaking game I made on a shelf, which was like the most satisfying experience. It was unbelievable. Like the first time I saw it, I was like, holy mackerel, I've actually done this. Like I did a thing on this game. Now it's really different. Like developers operate live experience that continuously evolves. I think that that's the only way to be relevant. I do not believe that relevance can exist with that old model. I think it is the hitmaker model, which again is based on having a big enough impact that you can drive the conversation. Very difficult to do. It's very high risk. And we already know this is a high-risk business because the budgets are so freaking big and the break-evens are so high. So I do believe the games in the future will be a lot more about like operating live experiences on all different levels. Like Steal a Brain Rot, I don't know like how big the people that work on that or some of the other like popular titles in that genre. They run it like a live service. It's certainly not run, to the same degree of some of the bigger people that you see out there with levels of sophistication. But they're operating a live service, and I think it's why the game works. I think it works because it can tap into the now. That's very hard to do otherwise. Finally, everything used to always be about consuming game content. That's what we did. We just kind of like chewed through this game content. It's relatively passive. It was enjoyable. It would stir you. It would move you. But it was very passive. And now really what we're seeing a lot of players just create game content because it's so much easier to do. It's easier to create the content, it's easier to build things, it's easier to publish them such that people can play them on any kind of device. That's super relevant too, because it's interesting. Game developers aren't the coolest people in the world, and they're not the youngest people in the world. And I have no idea what's cool to people. I just kind of go out there and create the stuff that I think is going to be neat. But I would be completely disingenuous to say that I have any place in defining what is interesting for 16 to 24-year-olds. It's impossible. It's complete. I was trying to debate whether the Led Zeppelin song "Ramble On" was better than the Lobby Cifre song "I Got That." These are both songs from the early 70s. I was debating in my mind which one was better. I am not the person to do this. Players, however, tend to be pretty tapped into things. And so players creating content inherently means that there's more relevant content. And so I think to achieve the level of relevance that gamers want, I think that things like UGC are table stakes at this point. Yes?
I think a good game that embodies a lot of the traits you described in that previous slide is Rivals of Aether, which has a thriving workshop community that can constantly both evolve with the culture and keep
it is. It is. It's amazing. I mean, we see a lot of examples that are out there of exactly that, of people that are doing that well. I'm not picking winners and losers in this talk, but I do think that you'll see examples of people that are doing this well. And when you look back at these different qualities, a future that's multi-platform, a future that's social, a future that's relevant, the big reason why I want you all to think about it is I think we need more people considering how we can create things that serve these needs. Defining like what does great look like with these axes? What are the amazing games of the future? going to look like? That's the whole point of talking about this, and I think that they are the things that are here. It's very interesting too. Like I came from a really different time. Oh, sorry. I came from a really different time where, there were different things that gamers want. I spent most of my time like serving those needs, and some of them were the needs that I felt like I had. I like great graphics, and so I like making games that had great graphics. It's just a little bit different now. And the thing that's really wild about this, and the reason why I encourage you all to think about it as developers, regardless of your discipline, to really, really think through like how you can hit these things, is that today these are more important than fidelity. They're more important than content fidelity. And that is important because of that 95,000% increase in budget. The thing that's killing us is fidelity. As consoles get more powerful, teams get bigger, they get more expensive. That's the biggest thing that's affecting the economic model. And the thing that's kind of wild when you think about this is that suddenly you have a whole generation of gamers that are perhaps slightly younger than you, who just have a different value system, and those are the people you need to think about reaching. Because again, like players are the boss. Sometimes you can change their mind. Sometimes you can do that. But generally speaking, we kind of work for players. We're going to charge them as much money as we possibly can, but not too much because they decide that. Like the player and the consumer has a really important part in this equation. But the thing I want to get back to that's kind of interesting here is that gamers might be the ones that save us. The thing that we've created in this cycle that we've created was one of choice. It's almost like an arms escalation. But if gamers do start saying en masse, hey, the kind of experiences I want are these, and we as developers can say, oh, hey, maybe we don't need $175 million. Maybe we can do this with a smaller team. Maybe we can do this with a distributed team. Maybe we can, instead of bootstrapping our own studio, maybe we can publish on one of the popular platforms that's out there right now. I think that these are all viable, and there are a lot of these small teams that are making a lot of money, or even more importantly, a sustainable amount of money operating these smaller scale games that meet this criteria. And I am not one to dictate what is art in games. I think the things that people are interested in is usually what I go after. It's popular media for me. And so I want to just open everybody's mind to a different way of looking at it, because it's the kind of thing that's going to affect you more than it affects me. I am toward the end of my career. You were just beginning yours. And so I encourage you to think about these things. And I will say, I've played a lot of magnificent games that have none of these features in the last few years. I don't think these are going away. I think Silk Song was exceptional. I think Expedition 33 was exceptional. I personally prefer Silk Song. But I thought this game was great. I just finished playing Resident Evil Requiem this past weekend. It's freaking fantastic. I am a Resident Evil fan. I've been playing it since the first one. It's the best one I've ever played. I think it's wonderful. And we have games like this, and I specifically chose this because I can't wait till this comes out in 2025. I didn't notice this until I was reviewing the slides, and then I just left it in to be snarky. This game will be a phenomenon. This game will be both relevant and driving the conversation. It is an absolute nuke that everybody's looking forward to. It does set a bar in fidelity. It looked like it cost all the money, all of them. I think everybody must have worked on it. It is. I think it's a good example. I'm sure it'll be wonderful. And then this one too. My dear friends have spent over 20 years at Insomniac Games. A lot of lovely people there. I'm very much looking forward to playing Marvel's Wolverine when it comes out. These games will always exist. I do believe that there will be a space for them. I think that there will be fewer of them as time goes on. You all as developers or aspiring developers, I want to open your minds to opportunities in the future because it's just different. You're going to be entering a very different market. Mobile market ain't what it used to be. AAA isn't what it used to be, but there is this opportunity to get out there and really serve gamers' needs. In summary, PC console gaming economic model is not sustainable in perpetuity. By the way, people were saying this like 15 years ago, and it hasn't come to pass, so I'm hedging my bets. I might be wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong. Yet all games are still one of the most popular entertainment media in the world. I mentioned even before that games aren't just games, they're social destinations. Gamers want experiences that are available anywhere, expand social graphs, and are relevant to what's happening right now. That's where I came up with multi-platform, social, and relevant. The key qualities of the games of the future that I want want you all to think about. And finally, it's a really beautiful thing. Gamers might be the ones that save us. Their taste changing may open some new doors, may stop us from spending our way into a very, very dark place. And that is all I have. Thank you. I can't answer some questions now. I want to say as a preface, I cannot answer any questions that are related to Epic Games, Fortnite, or Unreal Engine, so please steer clear of that. I've only worked at Epic for a year, so I have 24 years of experience to draw on that. I can talk at great length. I just prefer if you don't ask any questions about Epic. Yes?
Over your career, how was transitioning from studios?
From student to developer?
No, well, yes.
I graduated at a time when the games industry was expanding. I graduated right around the time that it was PS2, Xbox, and GameCube, and so team sizes were doubling, and there was a lot of demand out there. I was very fortunate to graduate at that time. Secondarily, gaming schools were incredibly new then. There was DigiPen, which is a handful of years older than Full Sail, but not much, and then I was in Full Sail's third gaming program. So it was a marvel. Basically, people needed to hire developers, and it was really cool to them that they were hiring some people that actually knew some stuff about game programming versus just general computer science. Anybody else? Where?
They have a mic.
Yes. Oh yeah, you can come to the mic.
Is that fine? They put a mic, so I figured.
Yeah.
Is that okay? I don't want to interrupt someone.
She had her hand up first.
Yeah, go ahead.
There was recently a game that was supposed to be coming out from Assassin's Creed about like current political issues that we're presently seeing now today.
Yeah.
But they ended that project because of the tensions that are currently going on. Do you agree that that is something that should be going on, or do you think that with the purpose of staying current and staying relevant culturally, that that was maybe the wrong decision when it comes to the social and gaming space?
That's a really good question. Are you from like the Washington Post or something like that? No, I'm just kidding. It's a really important question. I don't. I think it is a good question. The thing I would turn around to say, does it matter to you all? Would you have preferred to play an Assassin's Creed that does tap into current events? There's current events and there's cultural relevance. It's interesting too because I think some of the Far Cry games made more overt political statements. You know, it might have been that they ultimately chose that that's what the brand Assassin's Creed isn't about. I don't much like the idea of people not being able to tell the stories they think are important because of what's going on. I think artists need to be able to tell the stories they need to tell. I don't know enough about that situation to comment on whether it's a good idea or a wrong idea. I think that sometimes you look at the environment. I mean, you're responsible to your players. You're running a big organization, employing a lot of people. You have to look at a lot of factors in that case, and it's not as clear cut as it is. I've had to be in the room when decisions like that had to be made, and it's not one that's taken lightly. I mean, ultimately, our North Star, I think, at least the one that I always look at, is there are stories I want to tell, but I actually want to tell them to a lot of people. And if I'm not going to be able to do that, it's kind of a waste of time. I'm not the kind of person to die on that hill on principle, because ultimately what I want to do is to share these stories with a big group of people. I'm a big fan, big AC fan too. Yes?
I wanted to ask you, from a developer looking to go into the AAA space kind of mindset, you mentioned focusing on these design aspects of going multi-platform and really focusing on the player experience and creating a more of a platform for player content as sort of a looking forward. I was curious, I'm interested in more of the low-level programming side, developing engines, developing graphics, etc. And the engines that currently exist are getting so good that you could theoretically create something like this platform without having to make your own proprietary stuff to certain margins. So I was just wondering what your perspective was working in the AAA space for developers or programmers like myself who are interested in that low-level stuff, if there's still a good spot for that, or if maybe that falls more into something that bigger companies might start hiring out, or
no, it's an interesting question. It's funny too because that was my background. Originally when I entered the games industry, I was working on similar kind of stuff. I think that we're always going to need people that can work on that level, because if we need to run on everything, you need a lot of low-level programmers that are working on the various platforms. You need platform expertise. Is it going to be the same size? I think I would postulate. I'm trying to think. I would postulate that there are going to be fewer jobs in that space and probably more in the services space, which there are a lot of really cool problems to solve in that space too.
like networking, kind of, or something like that.
Well, yes, the amount of services that are run to operate, one of these games at scale is absolutely staggering. There are hundreds of individual services. There are a lot of really interesting problems to solve in that space. The other opportunity, too, if you're interested in graphics, it just so happens that AI runs on GPUs, and so that will certainly be in high demand. So that's useful. Is there going to be rooms for graphics programmers? I mean, I think there always is. People are going to like beautiful pixels. I don't know if it's going to explode or grow, though, necessarily based on what I've shared.
Cool. Thank you.
Anybody else? I can do two more, unless they're really fast. Yes.
That idea of trying to change games into having the players' ideas be the main focus, it seems like a lot of existing IPs are kind of trapped in the old model.
Yeah.
Is there an idea for how to take an existing IP and break it into the new model without it just destroying the fan base it already has?
I think it would be really tricky, especially when you're working with IP and you're not that IP holder. It would be very hard. There have been examples of good IP integrations in popular products that do this. I can't delve too much more deeply into it. It's a really, really interesting thing. I would argue that Steel Brainrot is an IP of a sort now. I apologize. I cannot totally answer this question without talking about work stuff. So I can't completely get into it. But I do think that there is a place for existing IPs. I think that there are a lot of things going on to figure out how to solve that problem. I don't know if anybody's exactly nailed it yet. Yes.
Gotcha. So just kind of talking about the industry could be branching off to multiple different things.
Yeah.
Because one thing we've also have definitely all noticed is there's a lot more microtransactions.
Yeah.
And different business models has also gone for many different games. Some games even have massive budgets, like Wuthering Waves and stuff like that, or ZZZ and stuff like that, and they are all free to play, but they're all now into a completely different model, like the whale models and stuff like that,
Yeah.
like microtransactions. So how would do you think it would be more or less it's not necessarily going just into social stuff, but more of splintering into a bunch of different things? Like we've got the indie games like Silk Song, stuff like that. A lot of people like that.
Yeah.
It is Lethal Company and stuff like that, and also so. What is your take on that? Is it splintering in a bunch of different models at this point?
Yes, I believe that it's splintering into different models currently. I think that they can coexist. I think that lane for those premium, whatever you want to, whatever those experiences are, I spent most of my career on. I think that those will continue to exist. I do think that you're seeing a lot of fragmentation though. It'll be interesting to see how things go. It always is in this business. It's always interesting to see where things go. I have reached a point in my career where people expect me to predict the future. I find it uncomfortable and hard because I'm wrong more often than I am right when I predict the future. But these are my best guesses. And yes, I do believe that it will lead to some fragmentation. The thing I'm really talking about, though, the underlying, though, is that there's a whole massive set of gamers that you can create really cool stuff for. You just have to meet them where they are. That is... Oh, wow, it's red. There's a timer here that's now red and ticking up that was ticking down. I have to wrap up. I appreciate everybody. I can hang out and chat for a few more minutes after this. Otherwise, thank you so much for coming. Thanks for the thoughtful questions.